Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Developer Experience Office Hours. I'm very, very happy to be joined by Joel Lord and Ryan Jarvinen today. We also have a special guest, Ryan MacLean, the one and only Ryan MacLean from Datadog. He is here today to talk to us about all things Datadog and OpenShift, is what I'm hearing, right? Let's just do a quick round of introductions so everybody here knows each other. And Joel, if you want to start off, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm going to get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Joel Lord. I work as a developer advocate on the OpenShift platform here at Red Hat. I come from a developer background. I've started using some of those technologies like OpenShift, Kubernetes, and even containers not very long ago. So I'm still kind of new to all this world, and I come from a very developer background. One of the things that I was trying to do recently was to get Datadog and to see how it can help me to kind of see what's going on inside my applications. And I was trying to set that up on OpenShift, and I had a few issues. So that's when I actually figured out why not reach to the experts. And I reached out to Ryan and I said, hey, why don't we actually do a Twitch stream so I can actually learn as at the same time as everybody else? So I'm glad to have you. Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Ryan MacLean at Datadog. My official title is Tech Evangelist. We were laughing about that a little bit earlier. Might change in the near future, you never know. But I've been in the industry for about 20 years. I started as like a bench tech, so all the way down from, working on laptops and stuff like that, all the way up to helping people out with their infrastructure, both large and small. These days, what I try to do is help people with getting things set up in the cloud and starting to monitor their apps as well as getting that big picture kind of thing going. So, Joel, I think when you and I talked, we talked a little bit about sort of the difference between like infrastructure monitoring and application monitoring and how the two might work together. And that's kind of where a lot of people are these days as well. So that's what I'm trying to help out with.
Yeah, exactly. So my main question was why should I actually use Datadog when like I do have all of those metrics and it tells me stuff about the CPU usage and memory usage, which I don't necessarily really care a lot about as a developer, but I was like, well, why would I even bring Datadog to get more metrics, right?
Yeah, and I'm not an incel, so you're not going to get a hard sell here. But the main thing is like for infrastructure monitoring, it's not a commodity, but like a lot of people do it, right? What you'll see, at least in terms of coming from your background, like a developer background, a lot of what we can do these days is almost like monkey patching code. So like injecting ways of tracing or maybe getting telemetry out of your code as it's running in the cloud or as it's running in Kubernetes or even on a VM or hardware. So you can see things like stuff like function calls or method calls or even calling third-party APIs and get metrics on those, but not just for like those calls in aggregate or maybe on average, but also how they might depend on each other. So if you've got microservices, like if one's calling another, what that looks like, or if you're seeing like a lower rate of calls for your team service, but it looks like everything's fine on your end, sort of being able to see what's upstream to that can be really valuable. And I think that's where like the APM crowd kind of comes in, right? And that's sort of our play. So on the infrastructure side, I mean, to be honest, like you'll get a lot out of a default Kubernetes install. You'll get a lot out of a default cloud install, like a VMware just install, a Red Hat VM install, like all those will give you like your CPU, your memory, your disk, your IO stuff, depending on where you are. You'll get quite a bit of information. But being able to use that as context for your application's performance, which is what the business really cares about, right? Can people actually check out as opposed to like, is the server up? I think is maybe more important. So sort of flipping that problem on its head and looking at it from like the business angle and then drilling down into your CPU memory and metrics like that. So it's just a different way of looking at the same stuff, but giving you a bit more context at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. When you showed me the other day this APM stuff, I was really impressed and I was very excited. And then I tried to install it, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to get it to work. To be honest, I didn't try very hard.
That's fair.
It seemed like something that was very straightforward, but I just had a 5 minute to test it out, and I never actually got it to work. But knowing that you were going to be here, I figured, well, we can just do it together. That's going to be even more fun, and hopefully it will actually work.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that I have the expertise.
Minor detail.
Yeah. So now that I'm here, let's just talk about like if it doesn't work. So one is I think one of the things you were trying to do is install something that's pretty new to us as well. So there's a few methods of installation in Kubernetes if you're not used to it. It basically there was a whole push behind Helm for a long time, so a lot of people got Helm working and like it's sort of used as a package manager for Kubernetes. We're moving away from that to operators, and I think Red Hat is as well. But on the operator side, I got to admit, we're still pretty new to this area in terms of having it being customer facing, even though we use it internally. And because of that, it's beta. So I think some of the problems you were having is because it's beta. We can try it out again today and figure out what's going on there. The long and the short of it is the install into OpenShift is very similar to a vanilla Kubernetes install. But there are some things like roles and permissions and privileges that I think are specific to OpenShift to allow us to get some of that, like networking, for example. I think we need a little bit more. And I have a feeling that when I looked at the operator, I didn't see a lot of that in there. It could be that it just needs to be massaged a little bit. I also know, and I was hoping that there would be a newer release of the operator coming out. It hasn't launched yet, but it should be out in a little bit. We're trying to do an internal conference here, so I know we've pulled a lot of resources in that area. But the operator definitely is our focus and is where we want to be. Not that there's anything wrong with Helm or default manifest. It's just what we're using. It seems to be a big push in the industry as well. So we're going to follow suit.
Yeah, cool. All right, so why don't we do that today? We can maybe you can give us a quick tour of Datadog just to get a feel of what it looks like, and then I do have a cluster. I think I've shared the credentials with you, so we have an application running. And we can then try to install the tracing as part of that application and see where that leads us.
No problem. So I'm just going to quickly log into like a demo account here, if that's all right.
Perfect.
And then I can share my screen. So we've basically got, and I'm sure this happens with Red Hat as well, like a demo infrastructure set up in the cloud that we can just sort of log into and show people, you know, just like a normal application and what that would look like. So something with quite a few microservices and quite a bit of interaction between them that allows us to just talk about how you can drill down, look at different microservices talking to each other, that kind of thing. So I'm just logging into it here, and I'll see if I can drag this window over. Let me know if the screen res is too high. I'm on a 4K display, and I know Twitch doesn't always like that. But
yeah, we'll let you know.
Bigger. yeah. I find
such a fancy setup. That's...
Yeah, I don't know about you folks, but I find that 720p seems to be the right. So I'll see if I can do that.
Yeah, there's this like happy medium between able to do work and able to see work on stream.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, so I think I got that there. I'm just gonna hide the there. So how's that font? Is it looking a little bit small?
Yeah, it looks very small.
Well, at least we knew it was going to happen, right? All right, 1 second here. We'll pop out of this, and we'll get some 720 going. But yeah, you know, people will have different resolutions on their end as well. Plus, in Twitch, I noticed if you've got it in like a little window here with the faces on the side, it can be pretty awful. So you can see that I'm just scaling my display. Let's pick large here and see. Okay, that I can sort of read on my end. Can you folks read that there?
That's better.
That's better. Let's make this full screen.
Good.
This is some inside baseball here on the Twitch stream. Okay, so I've just logged in. You can see my email there, and you can see that I've got some stuff running. I'm just going to quickly minimize this sidebar because we're not going to need it. But basically, when you log in, you can see like all your services, and we're talking about APM today. But we also mentioned infra. I think the main thing that people want these days is to see that application performance, or that service performance, or the relationship between the two, and less so the infra. So we'll just talk about like some of these services here. And specifically what we were talking about with Joel is just tracing, I guess, in particular. So ways of looking at, and this is like a 15-minute, but we can look at a live trace here. So what's actually going on in this, okay, so it's live. Actually looking at what's going on in this store, and I'll just give some quick background here. So this store is, imagine you've decided to start selling t-shirts with dogs on them, maybe some hats with dogs on them, some sort of dog branded merchandise for a fictional store. It's got an ad service, it's got a web store, it's got some, you can see Redis going through here. It's got quite a few components. It's got some AD authentication as well, if you want to just have that stuff set up. So it allows you to look at like a bunch of services working together. And you can see that there's actually traffic going to the site, right? It's flying by, there's errors, that kind of stuff. I'm just going to quickly pause this, and we can sort of drill down into a couple of these errors. So you can see like, and this is typical. You'll get like your 200 or your 2XX, your 3XX, maybe not so much, your 4XX, your 5XX. They'll come through, and generally what you'll want to do is not necessarily look at them specifically, but maybe in the aggregate or on a whole. So kind of looking at the whole thing. So traditionally what you do is you kind of go in and then just on the left-hand side here, I got rid of those. Okay, so all those 200s are gone. And now I'm looking at the 400s and the 500s here. So specifically the 500s, what do we got? And sort of what I was telling Joel is that we can actually click into these and then we can get almost like a flame graph. So if you've ever used something like dtrace in the command line to look at your app, this is what they'll look at. If you haven't, that's fine as well. But basically, in this case, you can see at the top here, we've come in and we've hit the Laravel service for pricing. And in this case, it's using a cluster in Google Cloud, but basically imagine it's any infrastructure. You can see that it's took like a third of a second to load it up, that kind of thing. So it takes a while. I'm just going to click on another here. Ooh, it went away on me. Where were we? Sorry, folks. We'll pick shipping. Pick a nice juicy one here. Okay. Here's some fraud. Basically, what happens with the flame graph is you see the top one come in, and then under that, you'll see anything else that it called. And some of these can be pretty involved. Some of them can be a little bit less interesting. And basically, you can see them on the left-hand side here when there's multiple services. So I'm just scrolling through to see if I can get one that's got like quite a few calls in it. So this one might be a little bit better. Again, it hits Laravel. It goes into Laravel calling itself, basically, for an action. But when I click on these, I can actually go right into what's happening here. And I can see these errors. So there's a guzzle HTTP server exception. It's saying that there's a bad gateway kind of thing. But I can actually go all the way down into each one. So this is Express, for example. I can get down all the way into the Express middleware, and then all the way to the HTTP out get. In this case, it failed at the top, so a lot of the failures aren't going to percolate down into the middle. We can go all the way down here and see that, Express is trying to call another service, and it's actually getting a find missing. And then you can see that it's then calling the middleware that actually goes down to Redis and says like, hey, this is not how you use a get call to call Redis kind of thing. So long and the short here is that you can actually drill down into each call for each service, and within them, if it's a problem in the actual code, you can actually look at the functions or the methods themselves. Now, some of this is done automatically, and that's great. What I would recommend, though, is once you start using a service like this, you'll probably want to start making your own metrics or your own business metrics or things that are of more value to you than possibly like the out-of-the-box stuff. That being said, the out-of-the-box stuff will get you started and get you started quickly, which is what we're hoping for today, is to do what we call monkey patching, but a way to sort of almost side load your stuff in there. So I think we were talking about Node. There's ways of just essentially importing it at the start of your file. You might need to, rebuild your container and relaunch it, or to launch to a test cluster or a staging cluster prior to just, YOLO yeeting it to prod kind of thing, making sure that you've got it working first. But that being said, it's generally pretty straightforward. In terms of Kubernetes, I'm pretty familiar with that part. And Joel, I might lean on you a little bit on the Node side. But in terms of Kubernetes, it's the same of installing any other like any other Helm chart or any other manifest, applying it to the clusters. Very similar methodology. So that's basically it. That's kind of like the big tour. You can go from here into anything else. You can click on this infra if you want to. You can actually go right into the host that serve this. In this case, it's probably a container, right? Since it's GKE. You can get all those metrics that we were talking about before. The infrastructure metrics will come up, no problem. I can go in and look at the network traffic, this latency. You can, from here, you can start going into the cluster and stuff like that as well. And as you go through here, you can, if you need to correlate anything in here, you can do that as well. That's basically it. So you can pivot back and forth between the front end, different microservices, different APIs, different API backends, and then look at your clusters as well. So it allows you to hit quite a few different angles. If you want to drill all the way down into logs as well, you can do it that way. So if you want to go into a different direction.
I like how you can easily connect to one to another and then to just jump in from one section to the other. That's great.
Yeah, and I think that's where the industry is going, to be honest. You'll hear a lot about observability, so sort of taking all of these and bringing them together. No, people will say it means different things for different vendors, right? Your logging vendor will tell you it's about logs. Your event vendor will tell you it's about events. And for us, it's more about grabbing the signals. So what signals can we give you that allows you to give you a big picture of what's going on?
I noticed on the previous page you were looking at there, there was a section that was highlighted called tags.
Right.
You want to tell a little bit more? I'm not familiar with what's the significance of that name. I know there was also errors was a tab there, but you want to go into that a tiny bit?
Yeah, no problem. So this one here, you mean?
Yeah. What does tags mean specifically?
Yeah, so a tag it's metadata, which doesn't really help at all, right? But basically,
Okay. It's kind of like the headers essentially on the request. Is that?
it. Yeah, it can be. So yes and no. So basically, a lot of this you can see it's X request ID is actually how we tag everything together. So basically, as things are coming in to your services, we're putting things in the header to say as it goes downstream, how do we know what's what kind of thing. The tags themselves, like if we go into infrastructure here, some of these tags, like in OpenShift, the tag might be like a project, I think would probably be a common tag. Maybe the node that you're running, or possibly if it's something like a specific namespace or a user's namespace, that could be a tag as well. In this case, I think most of the tags that you're seeing here are things like the environment. So an environment can mean different things to different places, but a lot of times it would be like your test, staging, or prod might be a tag. So that a tag's a key value just to clear that up. So generally a tag will be like what type of tag and what is the value of the tag. So in this case, it's a little bit small here. I'll see if I can move in. But basically this cluster location here, the cluster name, for example, are tags with the cluster ID. And we can use those tags to then pivot into the cluster or pivot into the environment. But that's a good question. Like the tags do allow you to give a lot of rich info. In this case, since it's Datadog, we've put a lot of tags on here, right? But it's up to you to pick and choose which ones are valuable for your biz. In
Okay. So,
OpenShift, most of these are default, though. Sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah. All right. Yeah, I was wondering how much of this is automatically provided by Datadog versus something that you might need to build into your model as your application monitoring matures, right?
Yeah, so a lot of this is default in the cloud provider, or I guess you could say default in the infrastructure provider. So in this case, we're
Mm.
in GKE, so there's a lot of GKE tags in here. But if we were in AWS or in Azure or what have you, we would grab those tags from that environment as well. Uh, but the corollary here is to get that data, we need to actually have access to read from that environment. So a lot of
Mhm.
times you'll have Datadog almost scraping, if you will, the API from the cloud provider in an integration that's just Datadog to cloud provider without any infrastructure at all. So it's almost like a reader essentially to tell you.
But that sounds like a huge advancement to automatically get this level of markup appended on requests as they fire through a distributed system, and then allow you to, like you said, do that pivot and then drill down with a lot more certainty as to what you're looking at and what the related edge cases may be if they're highlighted via these tags, right?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The secret sauce is sort of the pivoting, right? Being able to drill down or drill back up. And tags are basically what allow us to do that. That being able to, if you read the papers, they call it baggage, but basically, as your traces come in, that the baggage that you add to the trace are those tags or those things like the where the request came from or how long it took last time, that kind of stuff. Those tags really allow you to add that baggage to the trace and then go from there to get more info.
Awesome. Any other questions on this topic? I'm super into this topic, but I also had a other follow up. What happened to the hexagon based visualization?
Oh, it's still there.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I wanted to
Oh,
make sure
wow.
that wasn't
Okay.
didn't get overlooked.
Yeah, for sure.
That was a
So
big
that's
selling point for me in the past.
yeah, it's your favorite shape. So to be honest, I've been using Datadog for almost 10 years now. It feels like that's sort of impossible. But yeah, basically as it came out, I kind of get interested into it. So this is what I was used to when I started using it as well as the hex view, right? So where's all my infra? And you can tell we've got a fairly large demo environment here, but basically the hexes are kind of a way of the reason we use hexes, just so you all know, is just because you can fit more on a graph when you use hexes as opposed to like squares or circles. You can just get more on here, so that's why we use them. But the hexes do they basically allow you to look at your infrastructure as a whole on one screen pretty easily, and then sort of just pick out the orange ones, right, or the red ones, or whatever your visualization is, to see what's having problems. But they're still there, so there's a lot of tabs here on the left. Like when I started using Datadog, this left hand side may have had a couple icons, and we're up to a whole bunch of them now with like subheadings here. So the hex stuff generally exists under this infrastructure. So it's the host map is what we call it. So where all the hosts is. But we've now got like containers, processes, servers. serverless, network map, all that stuff. There's quite a bit going on. So one of the more common ones these days that we like to talk about is sort of like the network map. So how do things relate to each other? Now this is a bit of spaghetti here that I'm showing, but if we're going to look at those services, like how do they relate to each other? This is maybe like the new way, the new hex map, if you will, like the new APM kind of way. And again, like there's a few vendors out there that will do this as well. Like I'm not going to do the hard sell here either, but ways of relating your services together graphically. And the red green, right? So if something's red, let's drill down into it, let's see what's going on, kind of thing. But I'm glad you asked, because I might have just glossed over it and said let's talk about APM today, but this does allow you to certainly drill into your info as well if you want to look at it from that aspect. I think you might be muted there. I was just looking at the Twitch chat though to see if there's any questions.
No, there's a lot of back and forth about
your bill.
Other things, but no specific questions regarding the topic at hand. I mean, folks, tracing is huge, right? Like, the capabilities, I think, can be a little daunting potentially, maybe for some people, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff that you might have to filter through to find what you actually need, given that like moment, context, whatever it is you're looking for. So how would you help, kind of people just getting started with tracing, try to figure out like what is, I mean, we know golden signals, we know SRE practices, we know all those things, but with Datadog, right? Like, where are they going to jump in first, kind of going on their tracing journey?
Yeah. So I think the main thing we've got is like the ability to quickly get you some visibility, essentially quickly get you started with your cloud provider, quickly get you started with your code. The ability to monkey patch kind of helps out there. I think the main thing here, though, when it comes to tracing, there's a difference between what you can do automatically, which is certainly good and allows you to like drill into your code and look at speeds. But really, it's almost like you want to take this problem and turn it into like a business problem or a product manager problem or like stakeholder issue. So it's almost to say like if what matters to you is daily active users or monthly active users or signups or checkouts, what in your code do you need to instrument to give you that visibility? And then how do you trace from there? So how do you put like a tracer bullet into that specific area of the code? So if it's daily active users, maybe signups is something you want, or maybe it's like front page hits or something like that. Like that.
Yeah.
That's some metrics that's important to you. Sorry, go ahead.
Like the most important part is you have to know what metric is important to you.
Yeah, and that can be hard, but a lot of times those conversations involve sitting down with your stakeholder and saying, if we had to put a KPI on our site, what would that KPI, like if we had to have one KPI, what would that look like? And a lot of times they'll give you, 4 or 5, and you can say, okay, if we were to weight these, which should we weight higher? Or if we were to score these, like if, A plus B plus C plus D plus E equals X, what do we need to weight them for to get it? And I'm being generic here, but if we were to talk about like this site, for example, the store site, one of them would be like, how many checkouts do we have in the day? Like how many sales did we get, right? That's pretty common for a sales org. How many, and if you're going to look at it as a funnel, right? Like how did people get into sales? How many people did we get into the site to get the sales? And then between there, it might be like how many people added stuff to the cart. And then it might be how many people actually went through and added their payment info kind of thing. Like what does that happy path look like and where did they go through? And sometimes it can be talking to like your UX team about what that path looks like or what story it is or what branch they're trying to send people down. And then once you've got that kind of done, I'm kind of often left field here a little bit, but sometimes when you've got that done, it allows you to do a little bit of almost like testing, like let's try this new story and see if it works better, or let's try this new landing page and see if it works better. So it allows you to experiment as well when you get there. But basically, the long and the short of it is to figure out what's important to your business. A lot of times you have to talk to the business, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And trace from there.
Yeah. As someone that came from like a DevOps background, right? Like I cannot emphasize enough the need for developers, ops people, and the business to talk more, right? Like you're all after the same thing, but if you're not all talking about the same thing and you're not looking for the same things and you're not finding the right signals to indicate success or failure in some instances, you're going to be kind of lost in the sea of what is it we're trying to do here? So having that conversation and getting that balanced as far as what you're looking for specifically is vitally important. So even with this stream, right, like we have certain measurements that we're trying to hit and certain things
Right.
we're trying to do. So, right, like there's goals and then there's indicators of success, and you have to kind of lay those out for every project you take on.
Yeah, you got it. And you mentioned SRE there a bit. So I'll touch on that, but like then there's also like the downtime, right? The expected downtime or the times that things fail, maybe your planned maintenance, but there's some of that too. And when it comes to the business, like it's the same thing. You got to communicate like what your error budget is, or like what the reputational damage of 5 minutes downtime during Black Friday might be versus 5 minutes downtime in March, some random day kind of thing, right? It's totally different, but it all kinds, it's sort of packed together these days. And I'm honestly glad, coming from like a few different angles in the business, that we're starting to realize that you have to have shared goals, and you have to be able to understand the indicators you're using are shared in the whole company, and you're all working towards that same thing. So if it's more sales, then everything should be enabling that. If it's more viewers on the Twitch stream, then everything we do should enable that as well. And sort of like working towards that one or those two or those three KPIs to make sure that you're there. And I know KPI is kind of a word that people don't like, but basically those indicators, right? Those things that tell you what you're doing, the way to measure.
Yeah, KPI. Say what you want about KPIs, and it's more so just like anything, right? DevOps, SRE, it's the way you implement it, right?
Totally
so
agree.
if you have a negative experience with KPIs, it's sad, but it might have been the way that this was done. So the idea behind having those indicators are critical, right? Like monitoring is like that base level of the SRE pyramid. Having tracing as part of that, seeing where certain people are falling off the cart potentially, or falling out of the buying process, or falling off the website, or whatever it is, that metric it is you're looking for, right? Like they fall off the stream, they're tuned out by boring me, whatever. But yeah, those metrics for success are critical, and having them indicated and traced and observed are vitally important.
And I see Ryan's adding some stuff here on the acronyms. That's great, because I often do forget to define like what an SLO is, what an SLI is, what a KPI is. I tend to, it's acronym soup, right? But he's got a good point here. So it's important to say like SLO is service level objectives, so what you're trying to achieve, and they're informed by the SLI. So when we're talking about those indicators, as opposed to the KPIs, the SLIs are the service level indicators. Thanks, Ryan. I totally apologize for not defining them.
Yeah, no problem. Just thought I'd. Someone was already kind of. We were chatting about it, so.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's the best part about these office hours, is that we can all kind of tag team this.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm honestly happy to see the way our industry is embracing business and talking about shared goals. We talked a little bit about DAUs and MAUs, but like what a daily active user actually means. Is it visitors to your site? Is it signed in users? Is it unique visitors to your site?
Right.
I worked at a mobile phone company today. Not today, prior to today. So it'd be like, is a daily active user on your phone using like a TikTok or an Instagram, or are they interacting with your mail app? Like, what does that daily active user mean? It's really different depending on the company that you're at. So it's worth having that conversation.
It's always worth having that conversation, because each I say business, organization, nonprofit, whatever it may be, right? Like they have goals, and if you can align somehow from top to bottom, what's the other part? OKRs are the other part of KPIs, right? Like your
objectives and key
results. Like they should, KPIs should align to that across the organization. I mean, there's some tools that can help you with this, but there's a lot better outputs from people that work as an organization than people that work in silos. We've seen this over and over. We've seen entire industries get upheavaled by DevOps and people just working better with data, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, going back to if you look at election data or any amount of data, you can find and glean so much information about it, right? Like COVID-19 is a perfect example. We have all these open source projects spinning up, and they could all use tracing like this to see where their applications are maybe not performing at as well as they should, or to actually see somebody fall off because of that performance problem, right? Like somebody's coming in here for COVID-19, testing data, right? Like they're trying to figure out, should I get tested, yes or no? And if all of a sudden that, checklist is abandoned, that's bad, right? Like that's a public health concern. So having tracing in here and having, that like, hey, they hit this checkbox and then they hit submit and the next page comes up, it's taking too long because of this weird Java library or whatever, right? For this one page, like you won't know that unless you're actually observing and monitoring these things, and doing it in something like Datadog makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting it home here, but that's the other thing is that, at least in my career, a lot of what I looked at was like the mean or the average. And if it's just one of those surveys that somebody's not doing for their COVID-19 test or something like that, you'll ignore it. But these days, a lot of what we're doing is looking at like the 99th percentile, the 99.9, the 99.99. So let's look at those bad experiences instead of just looking at like an average, because an average will hide everything, right? It'll hide the bad stuff. Everything will look fine. You might have somebody who's got a really bad time. It could be a VP testing your site, right? That's happened to me before. It might have happened to you before. Yeah. It's like everybody else is fine, but the VP got in the elevator and tried to load the site and it didn't load. And then they come back and tell you like, hey, your site didn't load. And then you're looking through your logs saying like everything seemed to load. And the reason is like you didn't get that hit. Like you weren't instrumenting the app on the phone, you were instrumenting on the back end, and the hit didn't come to you, so you didn't see it. So some of this is like, some of it's end-to-end, some of it's not looking at the average, looking at your actual nines. So your percentile, sorry, actually being able to look at your 1% percentile, your slowest traffic basically, or your most error-prone traffic, and concentrating on fixing that as opposed to concentrating on making your average lower or higher, depending on
Right. Yeah, and like tracing like this can also tell you, right, where you might have geographic issues too, right? Like let's say you have a pocket of customers in a region where you don't necessarily have a great edge presence, whatever you want to call it. Like this can indicate that to you to an extent, right? Like if you see a lot of traffic coming in through like Tokyo, and you don't have a point of presence in Japan anywhere, that is like an instant red herring, right? Like not red herring, but like something that you need to definitely the opposite of a red herring, right? Like that's something that you can address pretty easily in most cases, right? Like spin up an instance or a region in Japan, and off you go, right? Like you'll get better user experience from that 1 or 5% with the effort it takes to have what you have now. Right. So,
and it's funny you bring that up because like I literally had the issue. So I've launched a couple services in China before, and China's got a host of concerns that are a little bit different when it comes to cloud providers. One of them is geography, right? So getting data into a region that's not in the US when you're a US centric company is difficult. So Japan's a great example. I can talk about one from my past. So in China, the main thing that we had to do is actually just set up a CDN, right? Like it's that edge compute, but a way to get something set up locally. And that's how we found it, was through tracing. So we could see that all these users are having a good time, and these 10 users or these 10 million users are not having a good time. What's going on with these 10 million here? Right? This is a significant portion of the traffic, and it's significantly slower. So what's going on? And that's what we found. It's just the round trip time from one geography to another can honestly be a killer for the experience.
It will kill you. Like, what was it? AWS, or not AWS, Amazon, the actual like the store. They figured out that like a handful of milliseconds is like hundreds of thousands of dollars somehow, right? Like, like they've grokked those numbers, so they know that like if they shave off a millisecond here or there, they're going to see gains, right?
And I can't remember what the number was, but was it?
It was like something really low. It was it was
they expect the page to be loaded in 1 second.
Less than 1 second page load times and like transaction times of less than 500 milliseconds or something like that. It was something ridiculously low, right? And it's like if you're getting to that level, you have instrumented great tracing.
Yes.
Right? Like, you have instrumented wonderful observation, right? Like observability, and just the capabilities to do that is amazing, right? But like you have to have that base layer first, right? Like you have to know what's going on in your environment.
And I think in that case, just to talk about it, sometimes you'll say like, hey, the page loads slowly. And that's, it's not good or bad. It's just what it is, right? So that's what you're the nice thing about tracing or observability or even just having these indicators in general is knowing that you've almost got a safety net. So you know what the baseline is. you can then say like, hey, let's start experimenting. Let's start lazy loading. Let's start putting our fonts in a CDN. Start making our images a little bit smaller than they are. Maybe they don't need to be 4 megabytes, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then you can start running those experiments into like blue-green deployments in Kubernetes, right? So OpenShift or what have you. Your Canary deployments as well. So you can start doing things in DNS and pointing things to just subsets of users and running those experiments and comparing the two numbers. And I think that's, for me, that's really where the magic is. And I'm not a front-end person, but I've seen front-end people do amazing things with blue-green.
Oh, yeah.
And just like targeted front pages and stuff like that, and being able to actually look at statistically significant numbers and saying, no, actually, it looks like when the cart looks this way, it might be ugly to you, but people get through the checkout faster and with a higher rate of success. So
yeah, it's amazing to me how the look and feel can sometimes be the exact opposite outcome of what you think it would be, right? Like we put a lot of effort into UX at Red Hat. We see more effort coming every day, and I know why now. It's because of stuff like this, right? You mentioned like 4 meg pictures like being loaded and instead of like optimized for the web type stuff. A perfect example of something like this that I wish I had Datadog back in the day, right? When the Fukushima incident happened, the tsunami, the nuclear meltdown, whatever. I worked for a newspaper company, and I was actually, one of my like key things was managing the CDN. So
there you go.
Yeah, like all of a sudden we started seeing this huge increase to one of our newspaper publications, right? A huge increase in traffic, just blowing the CDN up, right? And it's like, what is going on? Well, turns out that newspaper actually had somebody on assignment for a completely different topic when the event happened. They were sitting there with their, digital SLR, a sat phone, and an FTP connection, and just uploading picture after picture after picture after picture into our CMS. And, the journalists and editors of the newspaper loved it. So they just put them all on a web page. So you had a couple dozen
just
20
megapixel
files. 20 megapixel files, rendered down so that they actually fit on a web page. But they're being served millions of times. Like this went like viral. The post actually went viral because it was like one of the very few people with live footage coming out of the environment at that time. So like finding that out very quickly, hitting our you forgot to run the batch optimization process on these images, and it's like saved tens of thousands of dollars in a day, right? But that was just with basic billing alerts, right? Like we had crushed the billing threshold. If we would have had something first like this, we would have seen this huge increase and seen this huge anomaly happen and been like, whoa, what's going on? And could have started looking way early in the process, potentially saving thousands of dollars. So having this stuff sooner rather than later is vitally important. And I can personally attest to that through my S3 bucket woes lately. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there was something in the chat about billing. So on our end, we can set up billing alerts. So we're not like a cost management company or anything like that, but we do have access to those APIs. So you can certainly set it up here. I think if you're already in a cloud provider, you might have something like that. Like your AWS, I think has like a billing thing built in. So does Google, so does Azure. A lot of people these days are in multi-cloud. And I realize that that's not everybody, but there are people doing it. And setting up those billing alerts across multiples can be a pain. So that's certainly there. I've done it myself in my trial accounts. I've certainly gone way over budget on a Kubernetes instance that I left running on a long weekend. It's generally my MO. You set it up on Friday and you come back Tuesday. It's like, oh, that was $200 I didn't need to spend.
Just ouch. Yeah. Yeah, no.
Ryan, I had a question about how Datadog is generally set up. It seems to me like you'd set this up you'd set this up on probably on my development cluster, but on multiple clusters. And is this going to show me traffic flowing between clusters for that kind of larger infrastructure view? And could I have Datadog on GKE plus some Datadog on OpenShift, possibly both installed via the operator? Would that make sense, or is there different installation paths but still opportunity to view cross-cluster traffic. Does any
Yeah.
of that make
it,
sense?
it all does. I should say, so I'm new to this role. Like I've only been a tech evangelist for 6 months, but what I'm learning to say is it depends. I think this is like a
Okay.
common refrain. So, or maybe like yes and. So my I've not done the multi-cloud tracing portion that you're talking about specifically, but just to talk about how it works is when things get ingested, so when they first come in, that's when we rewrite the header or add things to the header as they're passed downstream. So my understanding is as long as the calls going out also retain those headers between your multiple clusters, then they'll retain them when they come into the other one. So it's not like it will overwrite or anything like that. At the very least, you'll be able to see the traffic calling out from one cluster into another cluster. If they're in the same cloud, no problem whatsoever. If they're in the same app or what have you, all those infrastructure tags will all allow them to relate. Outside of them though, so if you're going, let's say from Kubernetes in AWS to like a Red Hat VM in Azure, for example, the only thing that's going to relate those two will be that header basically. So my understanding is when you pass the header from one to the other, they will actually retain the header, and that's how you do it. At the very least, your egress traffic, so your outgoing traffic, will allow you to see that you're calling it. You can see that trace there in the last portion of that flame graph. And on the other end, you'll be able to see that it came from the cluster. But my understanding is that that actual header is what's going to relate the two. So that session, that X session ID is what's going to relate the two.
Cool. That
Nice.
makes sense. And then are all of these metrics stored within each of those clusters, or do they stream out to Datadog HQ where they're centrally queried?
Yeah.
If they were centrally queried on your end, then I could see this being really easy for me to perhaps match up those requests across clusters, right?
You got it. Yeah. So it's a bit of both, right? So for us to handle the volume that we've got outgoing, we buffer a little bit locally, which is good. So if something goes
Yeah.
down, you'll be able to replay the buffer. But generally what we're doing is we're streaming everything out as fast as possible to Datadog. So we've got a catchphrase called like logging without limits, but it's the same for tracing. I believe it's tracing without limits these days. But we basically want to take 100% of what you're sending out and not sample. So grab it across clouds and allow you the same thing. Like another catchphrase I love to hear is like single pane of glass, like putting everything on one page. I'm more of like a single pane of glass for your usage kind of thing. But if your use is let's look at all of my Kubernetes clusters deployed locally or multiple clouds or what have you, you can certainly put those all on one page. And I think I can probably demo that here, but basically like what does that look like, right? So how do I see all of the Kubernetes clusters together? And we can certainly allow you to do that from all of them.
Yeah, that's not usually my number one as an average developer. That's
Right.
more like senior level, but it's definitely
Right.
something that I'm interested in hearing what your approach is, especially as more folks start thinking about multi-cluster. If there's an easy way to map it all up before it's fully solved for the community
Right.
and start making sense of it today, then this is, has some clear use.
Right. So maybe I can steal if we've got some time, just to steal an example from my past, because I've been like a senior engineer at a pretty big company. So I think when I'm working with like dev team leads, a lot of what they want to know is how is my app doing like across region and how is my app doing across environment. So if it's in staging, they can come to me and say, hey, it's fast in staging. Why is it so slow in prod in Korea? And be like, well, I don't know. Let's find out kind of thing. We certainly allow that kind of view, right? So it's like what I'd normally hear is like, I don't care about anybody else's service. Where is mine kind of thing. So what I'd normally do is set them up like a dashboard, quote unquote, but like that page that percolates up all those metrics for them. So I think we kind of saw it in APM, and I'll drill down into it again if you don't mind. But basically, the way we do this is again tags. You can see the tags rule everything around here. But basically, when you go into like a service, you can then allow you to sort of drill down into each of them by just looking at like only look at this service for this region. And I sort of showed it in the Kubernetes one, and this is a CAN dashboard, so you're not going to see it here. But if we go back to the Kubernetes one, just like for one that you've made on your own, and I don't have an example for an app, sorry. But basically these drop downs at the top here, and it's a bit small, so I'll try to zoom in. But these allow us to say, like, let's look at just this one cluster, or let's look at just this one deployment, or this one namespace. And you can imagine for an app, like it would be, let's say the environment is something like the region. let's look at just this one region. Or if it's your environment is something like staging, let's look at only the staging installs. Or let's look at test, staging, and prod for this one region. So there's different ways of slicing it. But I totally agree. You might not care about the infra. You might not care about the containers. You might not care about the controllers or any of that. You just want to see, like, how's my app running? How many instances of my app do I have? Am I running up against like a memory ceiling that you've enforced on me? Like I've seen that before as well. People setting up quotas within Kubernetes for specific Docker containers that are deployed in pods and making sure that you're not like at the limit or showing like where you are in that limit. That kind of stuff is really important as an app dev. If you want to make sure that like the infrastructure is serving your purpose, or you know what the limits are that you need to be working within in your purpose. Like we had a Node app, for example, that would take about 1 gigabyte of memory, and it was spec to have 1 megabyte of memory. And it wouldn't take it right away. It would take it over time. Like it would take about a month. But being able to see that graph go up and being able to show the historical trend can be pretty handy as well. Sorry, it's a long answer, but like again, like a yes and, but with a topping of it depends.
Nice. Let's see. Let's see. I'm going back through the questions here. Okay, so I'm gonna say the username wrong, but C Santampier. Sorry. Does Datadog? Do y'all contribute open source wise to Zipkin or Open Tracing or any of the projects like that?
Oh,
Like
that's a great question. So
yeah, like that's really the gist of what I'm trying to get at here, I think.
So I was a Zipkin user prior to coming to Datadog, and there's a lot of work in that community, for sure. So Open Zipkin, I think, is specifically what we're talking about at that point. What happened is many people want to do their own version of this. So sort of two camps came out of that. One of them was, I think it's Open Metrics, and then the other was Open Census, and we basically we contributed to one, I think it was Open Census, but we contributed sort of the tracing area of the agent for them. What happened was there was like a push to bring the community all together under the branding of Open Telemetry. So basically, again, the answer is like, yes, definitely tracing is important. And what we do in the tracing world certainly does have an open source component to it. We're open source champions at Datadog. Like most of what we do is open source. You can see the code for our agent on GitHub. You can see the code for like a lot of what we do for even just our like infrastructure architecture, that kind of stuff, in terms of like how we set things up automatically. Also open source. We've got a pretty big GitHub repo. Definitely do poke around. But what I'm trying to say here is that in Open Telemetry, we are part of that community, and we do contribute back, and we're very interested in making sure that it keeps going forward. So what we want to see is people actually involved in the tracing world, not just specific to us, but actually, reaping the benefits of the community here. Because I think Zipkin was a big change in the way that we look at apps, and it wasn't pretty. It was a little bit hard to set up. There was a lot of moving parts to get it working. But once it was there, I think that's where the magic happened. Once you see these flame graphs of traces right across all your services, it's a pretty powerful visualization of what's actually going on in your service. So yes, we definitely do contribute back to Open Telemetry as well as a slew of other projects. That one specifically is for tracing. If you've not seen it, definitely look it up. I think it's just Open Telemetry / Open Telemetry is the main project. And in the community, you'll find people calling it OTEL. That's OTEL. And we're certainly involved for sure. But that's a great question. I'm glad you asked, because I've got a really good story around that one.
Awesome. Let's see. The next question was like, can you feed these stats to some external service or like Elasticsearch or some other kind of thing? Right.
So the way we work in general is statsd, and there's ways of multiplexing statsd. So let's say prior to getting us, you could take the same. It's for the most part, it's like vanilla statsd that we send. We call it dog statsd. It's like a slight fork of it. But for the most part, what we're sending from your apps is actually statsd. And the great news there is that, yeah, there's statsd collectors for Elasticsearch. You'll see some for Graphite, Grafana, that kind of stuff as well. But you do, like, if you want to keep a collection on-prem as well as in the cloud, If you need to have that backup for any reason, like if you felt like you needed to keep some of that on your own, or if you felt like our retention wasn't good enough, you needed like 10, 20 years, and we give you a certain amount in the cloud and you want to make sure you've got it, you can certainly do that. So there are a few multiplexers out there for StatsD. I can't really recommend any of them because I haven't used them, but I've talked to people at other companies that do it. They do work, and there's different ways of setting up. The one cautionary note I'll have here is that there's a lot of metrics going out. It's not to say you can't do it, but be prepared for like a lot. Basically, there's a lot of signal that comes out of like a typical Kubernetes cluster, and
you're being kind.
Well, listen, I've done it before. I've set up a 300 node Elasticsearch cluster and seen it fail overnight while I was like in the midst of needing a root canal. So like I've got the horror stories there, and I know it can be bad, but it's fun, and it's definitely good engineering. Like if you've got the cycles internally to look at this, or if you wanted to figure out what's going on under the hood, definitely look at StatsD and what's happening there, because that's really the meat and potatoes. I think that the same person who asked the question said like we predate some of this tracing stuff, and basically the answer there is that we evolved with the community as it came through. Like StatsD's completely open source. What we do is also out there as well. You can see the documentation on Dog StatsD compared to StatsD, but it's important for us to actually see what's going on in the industry and serve our customers at the same time while not falling too far behind, because it changes really quickly, right? Like it feels like every week there's a new way to monitor things or a new thing to monitor, or possibly both. So it's important for us to be involved in the open source community and watch what's happening to make sure we're abreast of the changes so that we can help our customers. But yeah, like learning about StatsD is definitely really handy. And if you wanted to like, we talked a little bit about monkey patching earlier, but really what that is leveraging the StatsD packages for those languages. So if you're looking at like a Node language, what's a StatsD look like for Node, that kind of thing. When it comes to tracing, it's a little bit different, but in terms of the actual metrics themselves, yeah, it's mostly StatsD.
Cool. So you could totally like StatsD out to Spark if you wanted, but lots of data. Be aware.
Yeah, Spark's a whole fun Hadoop ball game, right?
Yeah. That's. I mean, I would like to have somebody come on and talk about Spark and like what you could do with it with OpenShift, right? Like in the future,
right.
But not maybe for this channel or this show. You know.
Yeah, I've been there and done that, but yeah, it's a big topic.
I was introduced to Spark a few years ago, well, many years ago now, I guess, and I was just like, wow. But the cool thing was it was Alexander Rubin from Percona. I think he works at AWS now.
Oh,
and he had like an entire like Apache Spark cluster like running in their like data center in their office. And he started doing his demo, and you could actually hear the fans
spin up.
Comm closet like start spinning up. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, Spark's pretty interesting. I guess that the main thing we're trying to say here is that like as the metrics come in, and as you want to grab the signal from the noise from those metrics, it often means the infrastructure. And it often means like being prepared for that. It could be that you just want it for a subset as well. I've certainly seen that, like not grab everything, but just for this one app.
Yeah, grab it as some sample of sorts. Yeah,
exactly. Or this one target area, or you're right, like a sample rate or something like that instead of 100%, because that does become a little bit problematic as things start to go through.
Costs, money.
Costs,
data transfers, all that fun stuff. Yeah.
Engineering hours was the other one that I've been dinged on. Like, why are your engineers spending so much time on this thing internally? Why don't you just pay for a service?
It is. Yeah. Datadog is that ultimate build versus buy question that I think a lot of people have to answer for themselves. And oftentimes they realize that like there aren't like monitoring gurus anymore like there used to be, right? Like there's no one out there that's like a Nagios expert that is
that's a blast from the
not
past.
employed, right? Like if you're that is a blast from the past. But if you're out there as like a monitoring person, right? Like that's a rare skill set, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Please make sure you're being paid accordingly.
There definitely are still Nagios shops out there, right? For better or for worse, you might have an area that that runs.
I mean, it's like I'm not knocking Nagios in any way.
Yeah, I'm trying not to. That's it. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do.
What I'm trying to say is that like that skill set is an expertise that isn't like a huge focus
right
now in the industry for whatever reason. But we always say that monitoring is like one of the most important things, yet we don't emphasize like the tooling to do it kind of deal. So yeah, that build versus buy conversation is a huge one. But I think I don't know anyone that's unhappy with Datadog and when they decide to use Datadog, right? Like they realize it's kind of a very, very heavy lift that has been taken from them, right?
Yeah. I will say, like, I started out with Nagios and Cacti with Datadog. And,
Same.
And it's sort of silly, but what I was doing was keeping my Nagios stuff locally and using Datadog as sort of like that cloud backup, if you will, which is, again, it's not maybe the best use case, but it worked for me because I had some on-prem. I was basically HIPAA, like I was in a healthcare area, and I couldn't necessarily send everything to the cloud. But what I wanted was like my events, my graphs. We do integrate with Nagios and Cacti. They're older integrations, but they certainly do work. So if you've got those on-prem, like don't let me laugh at that experience because I've certainly been there. I know that pain, writing PCRE checks every day, all day. But if you do need like a safety net kind of thing, we can certainly provide that.
Awesome.
Are there other integrations that we should consider as well? Like I know some OpenShift clusters already have ability for Prometheus. Would there be a good reason for me to take advantage of that, but also take advantage of Datadog, or are they duplicate?
They're similar. It's almost like if there were a Venn diagram, like there's what we can do, and then there's what Prometheus can do. That being said, that small circle is pretty big. You can do a lot with Prometheus. In fact, if you're using like a service mesh, for example, a lot of those meshes will actually have syncs in them for Prometheus already. Prometheus itself is actually like a good way of setting up like a per cluster metric kind of thing. Multi-cluster, maybe not so much. And the scaling story around Prometheus itself, like there are a couple projects out there that will help you do it. Generally not something that, like it's meant to have like one Prometheus, and then if you want to scale, then you figure out how to multiplex it, that kind of thing. What we provide there is similar to like the Nagios. We can aggregate from multiple Prometheus installs, or if it's just the Prometheus install that you've already got, we can certainly grab data from there. So if you've already got Prometheus, like there's no real step two. Like our integration in Kubernetes is set to work with Prometheus. We'll grab those from you. There's a couple config changes you need to do, but they're basically there as like a, how do you say, it's like a default config. So the endpoint's already defined. It's just commented out. You'll uncomment it, and we'll start grabbing from Prometheus for you. Prometheus itself, like it's sort of caught on quite a bit, right? It is really popular in the open source community. So the onus is on us to integrate with that, right? As opposed to just ignoring it. Like definitely, if you're using Prometheus, like why would we not help you get those metrics into the cloud? So we certainly do integrate to it. But yeah, like I've dealt with Istio clusters, and a lot of the info that you get from an Istio, like an Istio-enabled Kubernetes cluster, lots of words in there.
Yeah.
But they already send out the metrics to that sync already. So why not just grab from there, right? Why set up a whole new path kind of thing?
Yeah, awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want this to be a sales pitch, but like, yeah, we definitely do integrate with Prometheus.
No, I wasn't aware of that, and I was kind of hesitant to ask that question because I didn't want to be like, here's a competitor, what do you have to say about it? But
that's not at all.
Really good to know that I could just continue to use Prometheus when it makes sense, and then wire up with minimal effort and provide visibility to other teams or whatever's necessary.
You got it. Yeah. So for me, at least, Prometheus is kind of like a metrics database. Like it's a really good way of storing metrics, or in some cases like the metadata about traces, but maybe not necessarily like a way to relate all of those very easily. The UI there are front ends for Prometheus for a reason, right? So some of the value that we provide there is just a way to correlate between all those metrics, or aggregate, or look at your percentiles for those metrics, which Prometheus also has, just in a way of looking at like multiple clusters or multiple installs or multiple different services in just a different way.
So a few questions here from our Carlos Santana, and there's a typo in one of them that might be offensive to people, so I apologize.
I see that. Yeah, I think he means like.
yeah, like
Are they
I'm not having a fun day today with moderation. I'll just leave it at that. The first question you asked about the pod scraping, Carlos, can you re-ask that, please? And you know, I'm not quite sure what you mean there, but for serverless, Ryan MacLean, what would we do for serverless metrics there? You can't really scrape. You kind of have to omit those. What do you recommend?
Yeah, so in this case, I must admit I've not done serverless in Kubernetes. I know that's maybe a faux pas. I've done serverless, I've done Kubernetes, I've not done one inside the other. That being said, I can sort of talk about how that works. So in general, when you're loading your libraries for whatever application you're running, so let's say it's Ruby or PHP or Python or what have you, that's when you'd actually load in sort of like the Datadog library that would emit out to either like a public endpoint, or if it's internal, we can talk about like that dog-stats-d sort of workflow again. You would actually send it into there. I've not done serverless emitting metrics to Prometheus again because I've just not launched serverless in Kubernetes. That being said, if it already does that, it would be the same way. Now, in terms of tagging, the way it's sent out for us, like if you've tagged it in Prometheus, we'll grab that tag basically. If you have not, then we won't have the tag to grab. What we will do though is things like the cluster, the region, availability zone, all that stuff where Prometheus is launched, we'll get. But if there's anything specific to your function, like the function name, no problem, that's metadata that we'll get. But if you need to have like a function name and a version pair together, like if it's function Joel's awesome function v1 kind of thing, if we want to like tag the v1 and do that string concatenation with the tags, that's something that you probably want to do as you admit to Prometheus so that we can scrape it from Prometheus for you.
There you go.
It's a long answer, but I think that's how it'll work.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of different ways.
What's the state of serverless in Kubernetes? Because again, I probably should know. I know there was OpenWhisk at one point.
Knative seems to be the way that the world is moving right now. I know that we have a lot of effort behind Knative right now. We being Red Hat, but I think in general, Knative is kind of getting the lion's share of serverless stuff on Kubernetes, right? Like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. I just have not used it at this point. I did play around with OpenWhisk, but honestly didn't get very far.
Same, likewise. Yeah. What was it? I think it was 2017. I was sitting next to Burr Sutter at All Things Open, awesome. And he's like, "Hey, yeah, man, great to have you here." Blah blah blah. This was before I worked at Red Hat. He's like, "Yeah, we're looking into OpenWhisk for a bunch of stuff," and I started looking at it like while he was talking, and I was like, "Yeah, I don't know if you're gonna get pretty far with it," So yeah, 2016. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, so it's one of those things where it's like, we ship an OpenShift serverless. Yes, we do. We have a product for OpenShift serverless.
Oh, right on. 100%. Sorry, I really
it's based on Knative.
Nice.
So yeah, we weren't talking about product specifically, but yeah, Knative the project, and then product-wise, there's OpenShift serverless, which is based on Knative. So yeah. And thank fantastic. You, Langdon, for dropping the links in chat.
Oh, this is great. So I had a team, like I helped deploy Azure Functions, has a library that you can deploy into AKS, but I honestly sort of turned a blind eye to it. It ran and it seemed to work, but I didn't really know what was going on. It was just like a scheduled task kind of thing. If you've ever done those in Kubernetes, like once a week, run this task for me kind of thing. Yeah. Serverless seemed to be a good fit there, but we didn't, other than it running, we didn't grab any metrics from it.
Cool. All right. I don't see any more questions. We're past time here, and if you do have any questions, where do people find you, Ryan?
So I'm on Twitter is probably the easiest way. Either that or I'm in a bunch of the Slacks, but I'm generally either myself. On Twitter, I miss getting my vanity username, so I'm Ryan _MacLean as opposed to Ryan MacLean.
You poor thing.
Yeah, I know you can't win them all, right? But that's not the end of it. Otherwise, I'm just Ryan MacLean, all one word. I'm out there. Let's see if I can stop this Zoom here. But yeah, basically, you can find me anywhere. Ask me any questions. We didn't actually get to Joel's question, but the main thing I was going to say is just like, if you're in Node and you want Datadog, we've got docs for it. They're great docs. It's one-liner. It's import Datadog basically is what does all the magic, and everything is done aside from the environmental variable. So apologies for not getting to that. We got into a bit of an SRE rant, which is a favorite topic of mine.
Yeah, sorry, that might have been my fault too.
Not at all. I'm certainly a guilty party here.
All right. Well, thank you, Ryan and Joel, for joining us today. Really appreciate you coming on, Ryan MacLean, and Ryan J, obviously, and Joel. Can't forget Joel. He's what made this all possible. So thank you very much, everybody. Join us here at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1800 UTC. We're going to have one of my favorite interns here at Red Hat this year, Cedric. He's going to be doing like his first 6 weeks with OpenShift. So Jason Dobies is going to come on with Cedric and kind of walking through what they've been up to during his internship. So it should be pretty fun, and I'm looking forward to it for sure. So yeah, until then, we'll catch you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Right.
Yeah.